Welcome everybody, and thanks for joining us for the Do Good Fund's first October virtual salon. My name is Jessica Hughes, and I am the collection manager here at the Do Good Fund, which is a Southern photography collection based in Columbus, Georgia. And tonight I have the pleasure of welcoming our guest speakers, Phyllis Dooney and Julie Plattner, both of whom are joining us from North Carolina. Hi again to you both, and thanks for being here. Really, to quickly introduce tonight's program, I'll just say that the idea for this virtual salon began over the summer when Do Good hosted our Instagram takeover series, in which we featured photographers from outside of our permanent collection. And the idea was to still be able to share and engage with photographers in their work despite all of the COVID cancellations and closures. So Phyllis was one of our featured photographers, and she graciously allowed us to share her work with our community. And we also invited her to take over our Instagram account and to highlight two more photographers of her choice, one of whom was Julie Plattner. And the shared themes of social documentation and identity that emerged from that pairing developed into this program tonight. And as just a bit more background, I'll add that Phyllis is a social documentary visual storyteller whose first book, Gravity is Stronger Here, from 2017, is a creative nonfiction montage made from photographs and short films featuring Haley Brown, an openly gay person living in Greenville, Mississippi, and her dynamic Southern American family. The 5-year-long documentary project was awarded honorable mention by the Center for Documentary Studies Dorothea Lange Paul Taylor Prize. Phyllis received her MFA from Duke University's Experimental and Documentary Arts program, and her work has appeared in numerous exhibitions and publications, including Lightfield Festival, Click Photography Festival, American Photo, and Oxford American, to name just a few. In 2019, she was honored as one of Photo District News's 30 new and emerging photographers, and she instructs at both UNC and Duke University. So now I'm gonna take a step back and hand it over to you to take over again for us, if you will, Phyllis.
I've unmuted myself. So I'm so happy to be here. Thank you to Alan and Jessica for hosting us. And I'm rearranging my windows, so pardon my clumsy intro. But I was really excited to feature Julie. I think her work is really timely right now. Julie Plattner is a storyteller. Her journalistic photographs and short films have been recognized by American Photography, Communication Arts, Photo District News, and Pictures of the Year International. She has been a National Public Radio Multimedia Fellow, where she created short films on emergent communities in Los Angeles. And her photographs have been published in magazines such as M, Le Magazine du Monde, De La Repubblica, GQ, and Forbes, as well as on the front pages of the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. She has a series of images in the collection at the Museum of Fine Arts, Houston. And Julie's going to be showing some of her work today that I've been lucky enough to sort of follow, at least for the last couple months. We've been in conversations. One of the things that I was thinking about before this talk is just the fact that images are silent. So as we sort of witness this moment, because a lot of them are contemporaneous with what's going on politically and socially today, you know, what's the difference between ingesting the world that we see unfolding silently? It gives us time to let it wash over us, see how we react, self-analysis along with intellectual analysis. And I had forwarded an article to Julie a little while ago about the National Museum of Art in Washington and how they just discontinued a show, or they paused the show, in their words, on Philip Gaston's work. He featured a lot of Ku Klux Klan in his work, and they were slated to open the show, and they decided to pause it and thought that the timing was wrong. So it's just interesting to think about these things. When is the timing right? Is the atmosphere too charged right now in America to receive these kinds of messages visually? I just thought I'd plant that as food for thought as we listen to Julie. So I'm going to let Julie talk about her work in her words and hand it over.
Hey everybody, thanks for being here. Excited to share some work with you. I'm gonna go ahead and read what I wrote just a little while ago. So I think it'll kind of get us where we need to go. Tonight I'll present a broad collection, primarily from the southern United States, but also the Northeast, California, the Southwest, and a couple images from the US-Mexico border. I'm currently in the process of editing these images I'm currently in the process of editing images that speak to the larger arc of my work, which is largely regarding the culture of working and middle-class white America under a patriarchal system. The theme of violence or the threat of violence is present, as well as subjugation of the feminine and dominion over nature. I think what makes this work different is that it is taken from the vantage point of the female gaze and with a feminist bent. The impulse underlying this work is to see the things out there in the world that feel threatening to me. Going out to see it and document it is, for me, a way of attempting to resolve that, or at least that was my initial impulse. Things have evolved and changed quite a bit, as well as my approach to the material, and increasing obviousness of it. There are also themes and subjects that I am familiar with, being white in America and having extended family that is very much working class and that stands for a maintenance of white patriarchal dominance, an ethos that fears the progression of people of color, women, and anyone outside of heteronormativity into positions of power. What I discovered on my ride into the dark side, of course, was the sheer and utter banality of evil and the creeping nature of cultural decline reflected in an America that is essentially turning in on itself. Hence the edit that you'll see tonight. This is the beginning of an attempt to connect the more mundane lower class struggle with institutionalized white supremacy. Of course, that statement in itself is complicated now, given the current administration's full-on open embrace of white supremacist organizations and the fascist and white supremacist ideology therein. I believe it is in the extreme that what ails us is made visible. So that's where I do my work. And as Phyllis has often reminds me, this work is about documenting what is happening for us to look back on and for future generations to see. It's a document of cultural preservation. So even more specifically, what we're going to take a look at is a slideshow of 50 images that are pulled from a larger edit that I'm working on for a book. I'm working through different edits and versions of edits in order to figure out the general arc and the elements that fit and that don't fit. So essentially, I'm going to show you one of the edits I'm currently working with.
I'm just going to interject quickly. I think you guys are all muted and we can't even see who is in the audience actually. So if you have a question along the way, put it in the Q&A and I'll be monitoring that. So at certain points, I'll jump in and ask Julie questions.
You'll see I'm going to show you a pretty broad edit here with some different themes. This was taken in Mississippi. It was during Hurricane Gustav in the Creole area of Louisiana. Oh, sorry, I said Mississippi. It was Louisiana. I'm confusing with, I have a bunch of more images from Mississippi. Okay. New Orleans. The city had been evacuated and these people decided to stay behind. This is a white supremacist in a hotel room in Las Vegas after a rally or demonstration in front of the Mexican consulate. This is taken in 2010. This is outside of a bear, a taxidermy place. Also in Louisiana, in the bayou, during Hurricane Gustav. So everyone was kind of running around trying to get things power back on, vehicles out from underwater, etc., water out of houses. This was taken this summer in Tulsa, Oklahoma, outside of Trump's big indoor rally there.
I think you and I have talked about this, especially with this image, and when I've seen your footage, it comes up and is even more on point or more obvious. It's just implicating the media in the theater around us, and being simultaneously part of the media. And, you know, what is the media's function? What is documentaries' function in all of this? I think right now, for me and you, what you mentioned at the beginning, we both sort of, at the very least, it's generating an archive for people down the road to look back in this moment. But is there anything you want to say about how you feel being both complicit and an observer?
Yeah, you know, it's a funny thing. Certainly right now it's bizarre to be part of a profession that's being attacked so intensely. I mean, I think my experience as a journalist was often, as a photojournalist in particular, right? Because we're separate from the writers and what they write. So having that experience, you know, at one time or another, and having my own feeling critical of the way stories, you know, it's the nature of it. You see one, you know, a writer writes about the most extreme thing, but it doesn't give us necessarily the scale, you know, of what's happening. So there's always a conflict there. But you know, as time progresses and as I see the institution being attacked, I'm more and more, you know, defensive of it. Like, people are, you know, out there doing amazing work, and it's always a really challenging job. And yeah, I don't know, I'm just kind of rambling, but we'll move. If anybody has any questions, please. This is also in Louisiana, Harkingastal. And this is friends of mine. We were out in a bar in Brooklyn. That's been one of the really important things for me covering this topic, is to find these themes, you know, violence, guns, in the unexpected places. It's, you know, it's important for me to, you know, and now that I'm living in the South, this is the first time I've lived in the South. I've been here about 2 years now, but growing up in the Northeast and the West Coast, you know, I had my prejudices. And I think that does a tremendous disservice to us, because these things are all around. We're grappling with them as a nation, and to separate, you know, one state from another just because it goes blue doesn't, you know, in every state there are fundamental American, we're dealing with some fundamental issues that we're grappling with, like guns. I mean, this is a really big one. Second Amendment stuff. This is in North Carolina, at a Reopen North Carolina protest. So these are individuals that are organizing around the lockdowns, feeling like their liberty is at risk. Tulsa, Oklahoma. This is a woman who was very upset that I was photographing, and she identified me as a member of the press, and you know, got really in my face, clearly. This is also in North Carolina. Phyllis, please interject at any point in time if you, I'm not as, yeah, please, if you have anything.
I will. I'm right here. I'm also monitoring the Q&A. So if anyone has questions along the way.
This is North Carolina. Same thing, the Reopen North Carolina protest. This woman also, you know, came at me pretty strong moments after this. She was on her way to me to find out who I was and what I wanted and what was I doing there.
Okay, Julie, we do have a question here.
Mhm.
I'm interested in hearing about how her process for working on a long-term book project is different from short-term photojournalistic work assignments, if there is one.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, for me particularly, the process is to move from a single story to something that's much broader, right? So in a book process, I can include images from multiple different stories. Like you're going to see images from neo-Nazi gatherings here and from a hurricane and so the process really is to, I mean, for me, is including and weeding through my own work over the course of a period of time. And most people I know who have worked on books and have done so successfully did so with work that they had collected over a long period of time. Phyllis, do you have any additional?
No, I was just thinking that also in our field, you end up becoming a specialist. There's certain topics that you keep returning to and because you return to them, then people start hiring you for them. So you build up a base of knowledge along the way as well. And I think it's good to hear from those people like you, Julie. You've been working in a topic for so long, so you're not just coming in and giving your opinion in especially a heated moment like this. You have a longer term view that's more multifaceted and complex.
Absolutely. Yeah. This is a man in Louisiana stockpiling, you know, in the event of loss of power, etc. In San Francisco. Yeah,
I have a good question actually for the next image. We might as well throw up the next image while we're asking this question. Yeah. I'd like to know, when taking photos out in the public, how you can stay both safe, calm, and unbiased in tense situations where you definitely have strong opinions as well.
Right. Yeah, I mean, to do this type of work, I feel like, you know, the journalist hat kind of comes on and I go into a mode, right? Curiosity drives me. So now it's quite different. Like the things have changed so much that it's really difficult now. Like when I was in Tulsa, it was really challenging to stay non-judgmental and neutral. It felt like it's kind of a new game. But I don't know, I'm very instinctual. If I feel like something is not right, I'm going to back out of the situation. You know, it's as you go, you build trust with different people, right? So, I mean, depending on what you're photographing, there's a development of a relationship. Like I didn't just walk into this area all of a sudden and start taking pictures, because it wasn't a public event, you know. And when we went to this more public rally, I walked in with them, you know, behind the police line, and journalists were on the other side. So you know, it's a process. And the safety thing is really, you know, for me, it was having the feeling like now's not a good time to hang out any longer. Things are getting pretty weird. But generally, the presence of a camera, I have found, mediates a lot of that. Like in more kind of, you know, chaotic situations, or, you know, like when police come in to and there's like, you know, some kind of criminal activity, you know, when there's something like that happening usually, or what was the case in the past, you know, I haven't been, I mean, but what was the case in the past is usually that mediated some of the tensions. But yeah, now that's changed a bit for sure. Yeah.
Along those lines, we have another question actually. What does neutrality look like with white supremacist neo-Nazis? Just Kind of a fascinating question.
Yeah.
Very complicated.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think when I had my journalist hat on, there was a mission, there was a job, there was something to complete. And my job was to collect this evidence or collect these documents or this material. Like, I wouldn't need to ideologically be neutral by any stretch of the imagination. It's just neutral in the, like, I'm going to put my personal feelings aside to do this thing. But it wasn't difficult at that time for me because I was really believed in documenting this because I really believed it was going to be a large issue, and it felt really important to me. So it felt like research, and it felt like an investigation. I felt like I was investigating these people in a way. So in as much as the professionalism can dictate neutrality, I would say that I was able to do that. That, you know, there were large repercussions to holding myself very in a professional way for periods of time. I mean, this story took a huge toll on me. You know, I had lots of stuff that I shoved down that, you know, I didn't confront or deal with along the way that kind of like exploded later, you know, if that makes sense. Okay, we'll move. Do you think we got to that question fully, or do you think there's a follow-up for more?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think as we go through the images, that we're probably going to be returning to the same topics and prodding them from all kinds of angles. So I don't think there's no opportunities ahead of us to keep addressing it.
Absolutely. This is a Hells Angels bike ride in Arizona. Again, working with, you know, what does it look like to be a woman in a hypermasculine setting? What does that look like? Speaking of that, this is the Armory in San Francisco. This is a 4-floor palace of BDSM, and this is a production. So again, you know, talking about the female body and yeah. This is Tulsa, Oklahoma. I'm fascinated by the feminization that I saw here, and, you know, in this kind of traditionally more hypermasculine setting. This is, you know, Reopen North Carolina protests. These are neo-Nazis being transported on a prison bus to a rally in New Jersey on the steps of the state capitol. Clearly, you know, it's interesting, of course, that they're being transported by the police department, right? And that they're on a prison bus.
That, if you can just go back to that, because there's another question. How do you think you'll proceed working with the white supremacist group after the stand down, stand by statement by Trump in the debate this week? Does that change anything for you?
I haven't worked with white nationalists since this gentleman you're looking at is actually deceased. His 10-year-old son shot and killed him a few hours after I left the house, reporting with the New York Times in 2011. So after that, I actually took a pretty big step back. I just worked with this one group, but after this, the story kind of took a turn, and it took some time to sort myself out around reporting on white nationalism in general. But I haven't actually been in and around white nationalists for about a decade now, and I don't believe I need to be. I'm really fascinated by militias, but, you know, the white supremacy has come so far mainstream that I don't need to go very far to find it. I don't need to, full on, embed or whatever you call it with white nationalists to find the similar themes. And, I started this project in 2010, in 2008, I started researching 2009, 10, I started to get some access. At that time, this was still very, we've been grappling with white supremacy for eons, but, this wave of it was still just simmering below the surface. So taking images like this at that time was starting a conversation. Whereas now, I think it's interesting as part of a larger story with these placed in the time that they were taken, but I'm not sure it's necessary, if that makes sense. I am fascinated by militias, but I haven't done any work with them yet. Okay, and this is North Carolina, and again, the language, there was someone speaking at the time, and it's all about reopen North Carolina, and they're taking our liberties away, but there was lots of other content there that was, pretty racist, and it sounded the same things I was hearing in 2010 at the neo-Nazi rallies. They weren't reading from excerpts of Mein Kampf, but it was similar language. It's just not, it's not as painfully, they're not like slapping an arm per se. Some of them still are, it's, this is a bear hunt in New Jersey. Again, I'm getting to the themes of violence and dominion over nature, and hunting, of course, has its various origins, like to eat, etc. I get all those things, but there's also a hypermasculine culture around it, hunting, trophy hunting, all this kind of thing. So that's what I'm hinting at, not so subtly here. Louisiana. Environmental destruction. This is, all part of it to me. It's her last home that she lost in the previous hurricane.
This is a good image to pause on for this question. Can you speak to the role of the gaze in the work and how you strategize that? In most images, the subject's gaze is elsewhere. In some cases, it is directed at the camera photographer. When is one more appropriate than the other for the purposes of your work?
Well, I guess one thing just to clarify, when I'm speaking of gaze, I'm thinking of my gaze when I'm talking about it, but which is, I think, an interesting thing too. I thought that question was that. So like, how do we see the female gaze in my work? But anyway, in terms of the individual photographs, I'm not so sure it's like I'm not like necessarily mapping that out. I think it depends on, it's so highly dependent on the situation and what my connection is to the subject material. If it's, let's see, if it's, a subject, my response or reflection to the material is going to dictate a little bit what I'm trying to capture from the subject, right? Like, if it feels like it's a revealing moment that gives us a window inside, then I'm going to look for eye contact. But if I'm just trying to show, themes or symbols, or, like this, like you said, Phyllis, right? Like, this is kind of her identity in a way, right? She's lived through a hurricane, this destruction. This is her life. They come through every so often, and she lives in an area that's super low lying, and they're getting worse and more frequent, and she's in it for the long haul. So this, without her, the picture of her old house obviously speaks to that as her identity. But it really is highly dependent on the subject matter and the specific situation, if that makes sense.
I think, you know, looking directly into the camera was really taboo in journalism up till maybe 10 years ago. It started to become more acceptable, and today it's just part of a standard part of the practice that you actually don't always edit those images out. But I think they're important images because they reveal the photographer. When somebody's looking at you and interacting with the camera, it reveals that there's some kind of exchange going on. Ones that are as extreme as the woman getting into the camera in that one earlier picture, all the way to people smiling for the camera. I think it speaks to the subjectivity that we accept in documentary now, and the revelation that there's an exchange, and that the photographer has a very big role in the telling of that story, and you're revealing your role in that story, and taking some responsibility that it's your viewpoint, because they're acknowledging that you're there.
100%. Totally. And I'm not as good as articulating as Phyllis, but I have made an conscious effort during this editing process. And part of what I've been doing is going back into the archive and pulling out images that I had discarded a long time ago because they weren't magazine material, or they weren't, newspaper material. And recovering them has been really fascinating. And I'm finding a lot of times I had taken images out that had eye contact that now really do serve the purpose of implicating myself in the environment, and some of those things that Phyllis was just describing. But I'm finding that those images are much more useful to me in what I'm trying to do now. Yeah. Okay, let's see if we can keep going here. Okay. This is on the US-Mexico border. It is a border patrol agent. Obviously, we're talking about violence here, and also gender. And Phillips, you had some really beautiful things to say about this at some point, which I wrote down and I don't have in front of me.
I don't remember.
It's hard.
I'm saturated in your other images right now.
See if any.
Yeah, I can't remember what I had said that you picked up on, or.
Yeah.
I think we were approaching it from an aesthetic point of view too. I mean, just the layers,
Yeah.
the surface tension that's happening in this photograph is interesting to me.
Obvious, like metaphorical, like behind the wall.
Mm-hmm.
This is a neo-Nazi. This was for a follow-up story. I went and saw him in Seal Beach, California, so he's not in his regalia. And one of the reasons why we like this image so much is because he looks a little bit, there's a little bit of a feminine thing going on here, which I think is an interesting contrast. Female gymnast, girl gymnast. This is in Arizona. It's Sonny Barger. I think it was Sonny Barger's birthday party or something like this. The butcher at the place getting those bears ready. Hell's Angels in Arizona. This is in the family home of the gentleman you saw on the prison bus. This is one of his daughters. This is during like a monthly meeting. This is in Las Vegas after a rally on the Mexican consulate. In Oregon, biker bar in Oregon. This is Jeff, the National Socialist Movement, the neo-Nazis. They are undercover patrolling with militia on the Arizona-Mexico border. So they were with militia groups from Texas and Arizona and Colorado. Louisiana. Louisiana and the Bayou. That takes us to the end. This is Mississippi. There's only one image of Mississippi. This is it.
Wasn't it in that visit to that town, was that one of the moments where I remember you saying that was when you got interested in this topic?
Yeah, absolutely.
By visiting Greenville?
Yeah, I went to Mississippi to cover Obama's election, and was really eye-opening for me. I grew up in very liberal cities, so I hadn't experienced, a place with such kind of continued I shouldn't say that. There's segregation in a lot of major cities that I've lived in, but just this kind of like more outward racism. Like a lot of people really just not paying attention to the election. Like I walked into a sports bar to find something happening, people organizing to watch the election, and there was just, it was filled with white people watching reruns of Sports Center, like during the actual election. And I walked up to, a table and I said, "I'm sorry, but do you know that there's a presidential election like in process right now?" And they said, "Oh, we're not going to pay attention to that crap," So I just kind of had this weekend of like a week that I spent there of unwrapping this thing that, it was the beginning of a very long process of unwrapping for me personally, as a privileged white person. So this is that trip, and this was in a little cafe where we also had an experience with somebody who was, said something terrible, and And this is Mississippi. Sorry, Louisiana, I keep doing that. In Riverside, California, this is the family. This is Joe, who killed his father. He was 10 at the time.
And you're still in touch with Joe, is that right?
I am, yeah. He went to prison. They sent him to prison for about 10 years. And I'm in touch with him. He lives in San Diego now, and he's trying to get his life back together for the first time. I mean, he grew up behind bars, so it's all a very bizarre experience for him. He completely denounces white supremacy, and we've had a lot of really interesting conversations in general. Trying to, I was right there when this all happened, and so there's some threads that connect. He remembers me from being in the house, so there's a lot for us to talk about for sure. And that's all I'll say for now, unless you have more specific. This is on the Intrepid in New York, in the harbor, in Tulsa. New Jersey, and Seal Beach, California.
All right, thank you for sharing such a breadth of work. What I like about the edit, which we've talked about in person, is this not narrowing in too much. It's so obtuse, and there's so much included, so many topics, that it really honors the complexity, and it's not judging individual people per se, although, you know, it's definitely highlighting individual people, but it's illuminating the fact that this is a group problem. This is an American problem. This is the problem with ideologies and what it does to people and what we become, rather than really narrowing in and pointing fingers at somebody in particular. And it also is pulling from all of these other sicknesses in America and making them part of the conversation, because I believe, like you, that they are related. Does anybody have any questions?
There's one in the Q&A, it looks like.
Yeah. In what ways do you think the work misses the mark? That is, as often as not, there's a gap between the artist's intention and the reception of the work. Can you speak to this?
Yeah, you know, I'm always struggling with that. One of the difficulties with this work is that it's been so, I've been so close to it, and there's been so many traumatic events along the way in terms of, you know, its initial reception. You know, people were really pissed off that I was photographing neo-Nazis. And the violence that surrounded it was really pretty devastating for me. And I was really young at the time. I was 29, and it was my first self-produced story. So I didn't have any roadmap or experience of what one is to anticipate, or what journalism really, I didn't fully comprehend how something would play like this in the world. So I'm still picking up the pieces and making sense of the work. And, you know, I've spent the last 10 years really unpacking that for myself and trying to figure out what's important about it, and does it need to be seen? And, you know, in terms of more specifically, what are the gaps? I'm trying to figure that out. I'm, you know, trying to work through that by starting to collect again and get up the courage to work with this material again. And I'm trying to do it in a really soft, quiet way. One of the lessons I learned was I'm not a photojournalist in that sense. Like I enjoyed taking magazine assignments and stuff, but the kind of material that I'm interested in photographing and the issues that I'm interested in digging at aren't part of it. They shouldn't be part of a news cycle necessarily. And that was a difficult lesson I learned on an international stage kind of a way, which was interesting. But you know, I'm going about it now on a much more quiet. I'm in an MFA program, and I'm working towards this book. And so, you know, this material I don't show this ever. I haven't shown this. This is the first time I have. So I'm starting to kind of collect it and put stuff where I think it goes and collect new stuff. So I don't know, but I'm interested to hear if anybody else has thoughts about where I'm missing the mark, for sure. I mean, I think my very, you know, the main thing that is of interest to me is the system of oppression, and dismantling that, or, you know, trying to create the conversation around it or complicate it. And that's a difficult thing to photograph. The system is a very difficult thing to photograph. Obviously you can do it in metaphor, but, you know, that's, you know, you can only have so many images of the metaphor of the system of corruption. So I think that's one thing that's missing, you know, the implication of individuals that are more powerful, that are wealthier, that are a higher class. Class is definitely a huge missing link. But yeah, no, I'm really interested. I mean, I'm always having the conversation about missing the mark, and, you know, there's a lot of people that feel like this is platforming. You know, that there's a promulgation or, you know, perpetuation of the energy that these individuals are putting out there, and that I'm, by photographing it, just adding to that. Other ways that I'm missing the mark. Yeah, I think about that a lot, and I have lots of different ideas, but you know, it changes for me day to day, depending on who I'm talking to and what their reception of it is. And people have such different experiences with the work. Yeah, it's hard to wrap it all up into a simple, if that makes sense. But I'm happy to get more specific if you have a more specific question or a specific idea, and you know, in terms of ways that I'm missing the mark.
Oh, we've got a couple more questions. The first one is, curious to hear more about how you're holding the relationships between the photos you showed today, particularly how some of the neo-Nazi and white supremacy stuff engages with the images of destruction and the BDSM stuff in San Francisco. What is the working implication?
Well, I'm trying to get at, and again, this is the beginning of my process, right? Like I'm just beginning to kind of pull these threads. This is the first time I'm showing this work together. So I'm definitely not there yet. I know that for sure. But the implication and the relationship would be one of, you know, just this idea of patriarchal dominance, right? And the ensuing destruction of the environment, dominion over nature, industrial, I mean, all the things that have led us to the point that we're at now, where, you know, we're facing severe climate change. I believe that that's from, you know, this idea that I mean, it's, you know, the passage in the Bible, right? That Earth is, I don't know, I can read it, you know, recite it off the top of my head, but this idea that we own the Earth and the Earth is here for us and we are allowed to do whatever we want with it. I mean, that's a very patriarchal notion, and problematic one. And that translates to the female body and the way that we have portrayed it, the way that we have, what's the word when you separate and you like just seeing like a piece of the female body, not the whole, like objectify the female body. I mean, I grew up in a culture, I grew up in Malibu in California, and I experienced what it was like to be a body and not a human. And that may sound extreme, but you know, the reality was very much that if I gained 5 pounds, you know, the boys would not, I mean, they wouldn't let that go. It was a thing. It was like, what's wrong with you? Why are you know, this type of thing, or my nose, or my, you know, I mean, I think a lot of women have that type of experience, but it can be really extreme. Yeah, did I answer the whole question? Do you have any thoughts, Phyllis?
No, I mean, it's hard for me to answer because I've been involved now, seeing the work behind the scenes for long enough where I've lost a sense, like, to me, they naturally come together and the associations are there. I don't know how much of that is because you know, anecdotally, we've talked about it and you've told me about the images, and there's connective tissue because of you. Mm-hmm. I believe in the connective tissue on my own terms, but a lot of it, I see it through your eyes as well. But I think it's legitimate, and I hope, you know, when you resolve the work and it becomes a book, that connective tissue will really come together. I think it's hard at this stage to establish the threads.
Like an outline to me almost, you know, that's like an outline that I'm going to start filling in with ephemera and with certain kinds of documents and with letters, with writing. I mean, more images. So yeah.
We have another one. Thank you for showing this work. One thing I'm wondering is that you describe the photos as names of places when talking about it. And in a way, it seems like you are establishing some form of taxonomy. What's the importance of place in your work?
Question. I think it's just a reference point. It's just a way for me to, it's like a, literal mapping. Part of the collecting of images from different geographical locations has been trying to put together a big picture, even if it's, simply geographical, getting these different kind of flavors of America in this geographical way. I see things visually, right? So when I'm thinking or talking, I'm thinking about it as a map. And does that kind of answer it, Phyllis, or my?
Yeah, to me that makes sense. It's like when people ask me about my work in terms of years, I can't do it. I just don't know. Like, is it 2006 or 2008? I have no idea. So it might be a function of your memory and how you gather your work in your head. I don't know. But I mean, I think place to me anyway is really important, as important as the people, because it's part of an ecosystem that the photo generated in. Can you still hear me?
Hey.
Hey.
I totally dropped out, I guess.
We have one more question. Or this is more of a comment. Super interesting to think that the system is impossible to document. One wonders if that is one of its nefarious tools. Love your work, by the way.
Sweet. Yeah, I mean, I think it's the nature of structure, right? Structure of right, the system. I mean, it's just so much easier to photograph people. I don't know, are there photographers that are photographing the system in an effective way? I'm sure there are. It's just not the type of work that I'm very much, my impulse is just to be out there and be around people and talk to them and see them and feel them, feel like their energy, if you will. I'm very much like, I like to move around in the world. So it feels, my work and my subject matter is always very personal. I wonder, if there are, when I think of structures, I don't know. I have to think about that. It's a good question to think about that.
I think it's such a common struggle, especially today. I mean, I think the discourse in photography and documentary has evolved to that, but it has in other disciplines too. People are tired of being highlighted or shamed. And a lot of times the people on the other side of that, making work, documenting it, writing history books, are realizing more and more that there's this larger invisible system that we're really talking about. When we say it's the difference between shooting or taking a photograph of a police officer and blaming him for police violence or blaming the system. And nobody wants to blame the individual officer. I mean, of course, there are plenty of officers who are racist, but does that make any progress for us, to keep isolating people, that whole bad apple argument? And so the conversation has evolved that there's these invisible systems out there, and how do we responsibly reveal that? We reveal it through people, but how do you do that without pointing fingers and making people the sacrificial lamb? It's just
Absolutely.
Complicated and difficult.
Yeah, it's critical to talk about the structure, and even if my work functions as a point to, as an entry point to talk about the structure, the system of oppression, I think then it's done something, but yeah, I mean, that's definitely one of the things that I'm trying to away from, is implicating. I mean, one of the things I got really, I was in trouble for really work by some individuals. I mean, some took it a totally different way, but, a lot of people were like, you're not, implicating them enough. And to me at the time, and the way that I was approaching the work, I was like, they're neo-Nazis. Like, what do I have to implicate? Like, I thought we've already understood that these guys are not on the correct side of morality here. I mean, so it's so dependent on who, and that's what I learn as now I'm 13 years in here, but everybody has a different opinion and idea and, different experience of it. And certainly when you start to walk into some more complicated and controversial subject matter, you're going to get all sorts of responses and death threats and, whatever.
There's one comment in here, maybe the system can only ever be implied. A question, but not to answer right now, probably.
You struggle with it?
I mean, you can see it in the history of photography. I mean, one way to implicate the system used to be to go shoot impoverished people, but then you're exploiting impoverished people. So we're constantly trying to figure out on the ground, where is this showing up, because it is an invisible architecture. So you're trying to use people to reveal it, and whether you shoot the perpetrators or the victims, they're both ethically charged. You're always isolating people to reveal a larger problem that shows up in them, but is not necessarily is not unique to them.
Right.
So I'm not sure where the answer is. I think it's just part of the evolution that we're all trying new ways all the time, and that the genre is evolving to try and tackle this major problem.
Totally. Yeah. Part of working through, I mean, anytime one picks up something that is complicated, there's going to be potholes along that road that I mean, things have changed so much just in 5 years. What's acceptable to do? We're progressing, we're changing. Things are shifting, and I think certainly my experience has been adapting, evolving, learning, questioning myself, letting go of, like, okay, I screwed that up. What can I learn from it, and how do I move forward? And this type of.
We only have 1 more minute, so yeah, it looks like you've jumped back in, Jessica, right on time, right on cue.
Well, I'm going to just really quickly share this final screen here that has a little bit more information if anybody is looking to find out more about Phyllis and Julie and their work. And if there's any last minute questions, feel free to type those in that Q&A box down at the bottom. And then I'll also note that the next Do Good Fun virtual salon is going to be at the end of the month on October 29th at 6:30 p.m. Eastern, and we're going to have Magnum photographer Eli Reed join us. So hope you all can join us for that too. And it looks like that's it. No more questions. So thanks everybody for joining us, and thank you both, especially Phyllis and Julie, for being here.
Thanks, Jessica. Thank you, Alan.
Yeah, thanks to everyone who came, and thanks you guys for hosting us. Have a good one. Stay safe, everybody.